Today we're going to look at sales and distribution. The first thing we're going to look at is blanket agreements. Then we're going to have a look at the sales process, and we'll also have a look at document generation wizard, printing, batch printing. We'll also take a look at recurring invoices. Then we're going to go through the pick and pack manager, have a look at a few sales reports. First thing we're going to do is look at the blanket agreement. So what is a blanket agreement? Why do we need it? What do we use it for? Well, a blanket agreement is typically a contract or an agreement that you have with your customers, and we have exactly the same also on the purchasing side, so it could also be an agreement with your suppliers. But today we're going to focus on the sales side of things. So a blanket agreement is typically a contract where you agree to sell a certain amount of products at certain quantities and at certain values. And that typically happens over some sort of time frame. Could be weekly, could be monthly, could be quarterly, could cover a period of a few months or a year or more than a year. So let's go ahead and add one. And I'm just going to put in my customer. I could put in a reference if I have one. I could also use a BP project code. So if it's specific to a project, or if your customers asked you to track it against a specific project, you could do that. The nice thing of using the project is that you could pull a summary across a specific project and see what your commitments are. Then the other thing that's important is the agreement method. Is it an item-based one or purely monetary-based? Today we're going to look at the items method. We can give it a start date and an end date. This could be somewhere in the future. And you'll see termination date is grayed out. And the reason for that is we haven't done anything yet. We haven't added this. We haven't had an opportunity to do any documents against it yet, so we can't terminate something we haven't started yet. Give it a description. And this could be the contract number, whatever it may be. So that's our header. On our general tab, we have an agreement type, whether or not it's general or specific, and this has got to do with the pricing. So if you have a look at this little tick box on the left-hand side, it is ticked at the moment to ignore prices. If I made it specific, it would not ignore prices. Next thing we can set is the payment terms. The reason for this is that contract or agreement with a customer would normally be, let's say, a 30-day account, but if we commit to the following quantities over the next 6 months, we'll give you a better price, but we expect you to pay within 14 days, for example. So you could choose a different payment term for the specific agreement. The same with your payment method. You might expect them to pay by EFT, where they usually give you a check, or you might expect them to pay you in cash up front, etc. You can also choose the specific shipping type for this agreement. How will the goods be shipped? And then if you want to, you can fill in a probability. If you're expecting it to be 100%, then you could put that in as well. On the right-hand side, we've got approved and draft. Now, what you could do is add the sales agreement and leave it in draft mode until you're ready to do an approval of it. And there's two ways of doing the approval. The one way is just to simply change this manually to approved. The benefit of keeping it in draft mode is that while you're still busy adding or making changes or finalizing this contract and capturing all the relevant information, it will not be available in the rest of the system until you have set it to approved. So there is a benefit in keeping it in draft mode. You can, of course, also use the SAP approval process for this. I'm not going to go through that today, but I will just show you it is available on your template. So if you do have the need for this type of transaction to go through an approval process, that is available in SAP as well. Right, and then finally, you could also set the owner of this document. If you're using document ownership, which prevents certain people from seeing other people's transactions, then you could fill that in as well. And you could also set a renewal reminder to let you know when this contract is about to finish or to end. And you could set that for 10 days prior to our end date. The next thing we need to do is put in our items. And I'm going to keep it simple. I'm just going to use one item for today. And I can put in the planned quantities, the unit prices, etc. And let's put a quantity of 50. Now, once again, depending on your setting on the first screen, you might be ignoring prices. And typically, contracts are more quantity driven than specific pricing. And you could allow your special prices or your price list inside of SAP to drive what the prices will be on your documents rather than expecting the blanket agreement to do that. So you could leave this unit price blank and your price lists and special prices will still effectively give you the price when doing your transactions. Now, once we've set up our items and we've put in the planned quantities, the next thing to do is to determine what the quantity breaks per period will be. And to do that, we double-click on the row number. Then set our frequency, and you'll see daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, etc., all available to you. So I'm going to set that as monthly, and the first one will be for this period, and let's say it's going to be 20. Our next one for the month thereafter, and we'll also set that to 20. And my final one will be for the balance of 10. And I'm going to be shipping these out of my warehouse number 5. Important to get your warehouse correct. On the right hand side, you'll see a column for consume forecast. Now, once again, we're not going to have enough time to go through every fine detail this afternoon. But it is important when you are using the forecasting method in your MRP, for those of you who do use MRP, Material Requirement Planning, it's important to let the system know whether or not your sales orders and your blanket agreements are consumed within those forecasts. Okay, so that's part of your planning information there. Another nice little feature is the activities on the right-hand side, and you could create an activity per row. And these activities could be reminders to book a truck, to deliver the goods. It could be an activity to phone the customer and say, we've fulfilled this month's order, it's on its way, whatever that may be. I'm going to go ahead and update that. And now we're going to add that. So if we go back to it, there's number 2. And if we have a look under documents, nothing, we haven't done anything yet. We've added our blanket agreement, but it has not been used anywhere in our sales process yet. I'm going to keep that one side, and we're going to jump into sales orders, and I'm going to deliberately not copy from the blanket agreement. Now, typically, one should be disciplined and do that, but I'm just going to illustrate that if you do forget, it's not a problem. The system will pick up that there's a blanket agreement in place. So I'm going to grab my item, and we'll just do 5 of them, and go ahead and click on add. And if we have a look at our relationship map, nothing there, it's just our sales order. If we just refresh the blanket agreement, you'll notice it's picked up my sales order and attached it to the blanket agreement for me automatically. So the correct way of doing that would be to obviously select the blanket agreement, especially if there's more than one. In this instance, we're fortunate to have just the one. And we could either draw the entire document or we could customize. I'm going to customize purely because I have a commitment to just do 20 at a time. And what I'm going to do, so make this a bit bigger, you can all see it, is I'm only going to actually use 20 of that. So copy that in. And I did 5 on another document, so I'm just going to add 15 on this instance, and I haven't given it a delivery date. There we go. Click on add, and if we go back to our sales blanket agreement, we've now used 20. If we go back to our details for a moment, we'll see our cumulative quantity has been updated. And if we double click on the row, there's the 20 that I said we're going to consume. So I know I've got 50 minus 20, 30 to go. But the next thing we're going to have a look at is the delivery process. And I'm just going to go ahead and close that out. We've got 2 sales orders that are already open. And there's 2 ways of creating the delivery note from our sales order. The one way would be to just copy to delivery note. The copy to, however, limits you to a 1-to-1 relationship. What that means is that I can only take this specific document and push this document into the target document. If I wanted to do multiple base documents, I would need to start the other way around, which would be to open the delivery note. And in this instance, if I do a copy from rather than the copy to, I should be able to choose more than one document. And in this instance, I could just highlight more than one. And I'm just going to bring it all through. And it says, no, there are 2 different types. Use shipped goods account. Now, the reason for that is I've actually turned something on called use shipped goods account. Now, what's the benefit of that? Typically in SAP, when you do a delivery note, it creates a cost of sales entry. And that's fine as long as your invoice is posted in the same period, being months, for example. But what happens when you have an invoice in the next month is your cost of sales sits in the previous month and the sales entry sits in the next month, and it becomes a bit difficult to reconcile and also to look at your gross profit reports, etc. So there is an option in the system that you can turn on, and it's worth mentioning it before we show you the rest of it. Under our general settings, under the business partner or BP tab, we can turn on the option, and there it is over there, used shipped goods account for customers. Once that's turned on, that's not the end of it. The next part of it is you need to set it for all the customers that it's relevant to. Now, if you want it for all customers, unfortunately, there's no quick way to do it other than possibly a data transfer workbench update, some sort of an import or a DI API update. If you're going to do it in the system, it's going to be one by one, unfortunately, that you need to go to each customer and turn it on. But the benefit is that for some customers, you might want this function. For others, you might want to keep it turned off. Okay. So once you've ticked this, what will happen is the delivery note will no longer post a cost of sales entry. It will move the inventory into a temporary account, the goods in transit account, or whatever you prefer to call the account. And once the invoice happens, it will come out of our goods in transit and then realize the cost of sales entry, and thereby putting our cost of sales and sales into the same period. So let's go ahead and see how that works. I'm going to do just a single copy to in this instance, and go ahead and add this document. And straight away, it's just going to ask for my batch information. I'm going to let it auto-select. And then we should be able to add this document. And if we now go back to the delivery note we just created, I've got an account called Customer Goods in Transit that has been posted to. I should also be able to go to my inventory, my stock on hand for the specific item, and that quantity of 5 should still be inside my committed. So if I go and have a look at my stock posting list, then delivery note 838 has reduced my stock by 5, but is not posted to my cost of sales account. We'll see in a moment what the impact will be on the invoice. And I'm not going to change the date. I think we're all happy with the fact that the invoice could be in a different date. I'm just going to add it within the same period and show you that there's 2 entries. So we'll go back to our invoice, have a look at the journal, and now we've got our sales revenue and our cost of goods leg. So nice little feature for those of you that would prefer to get your cost of sales timing correct inside SAP. Now for those of you that have a situation where you don't necessarily want your invoices added straight away, or you don't want them printed straight away, SAP does have something called Document Generation Wizard. Now you can save parameters with this, and I'm going to show you in a moment how easy that is to do. The benefit is that you could hold back all of your invoicing and only release them in groups, for example, based on the region where the delivery is taking place. So I've added one called Sydney Metro. Let's go ahead and add another one. We might have one called NSW Interstate, so where we sending goods from our New South Wales warehouse to a different state, for example, and all the spelling. My target document I'm going to set up as an invoice, and I'm going to pull that from deliveries. I'm not going to fill any dates in because this is going to get used on a regular basis, and I can then go ahead and add my customers. Once the customer list is there, you can untick and tick just the ones that are interstate related. What do you want to do if there's any errors? And you can change those settings. And then right at the end, I could just execute this and not save it, or I could just save the parameters and exit and come back and run it later. I'm going to save the parameters and execute at the same time. And let's see if it picks up any delivery notes that could be consolidated. And it has generated something at the end. A few of them had errors, and I see quite a few of these are customers that have not paid us and have exceeded their credit limits. So if I go back to the Document Generation Wizard, you see it saved my parameter set, and I can use those parameters on an ongoing basis. So end of every day, when you're ready to pack the truck for New South Wales Interstate, quickly generate all the invoices for that area, or quickly generate all the delivery notes for that area, and off they go. Similarly, you can do the printing as well. So if you have turned off the auto printing on adding of documents, you could use the document printing wizard for that. Choose your dates and your document type, and then decide whether you want only the ones that have not been printed yet. So if you wanted to reprint, you could simply untick that and it would bring up ones that you've previously printed. And then only open or documents that have already been closed or paid, etc. In this case, I want only the open ones that I haven't printed yet. Bring your list of all of the invoices. In this case, I only have one, but if you had multiple, you could select the rows by holding your control key and clicking on the row number, or hold shift if you want to go from to, for example. And when you're ready, hit the print button and you can do a bulk print of all your invoices. And this could once again be done for specific customers in a certain area, for example. Okay. The next thing we're going to look at this afternoon is the recurring transaction. And setting up a recurring transaction is really quite simple. There's 2 steps to it, and you'll see I've actually added quite a few already, and I can add more to the list. Now, this recurring transaction list is all of the documents that are sitting and waiting to be executed. And I'm not going to execute them right now. I'm going to go ahead and add another one. And we'll call this monthly 2. And once again, let's use a sales order. And then we need to decide how often we want this recurring entry to remind us to be created. And the options, once again, daily, weekly, monthly, etc. Now, if I set it to monthly, it's only going to prompt me somewhere in the future. So if I set it to daily, you'll see it will start today, and I'll be able to show you the prompt for that. So I'll just set it to daily. The next important thing before you do anything else is to actually add a draft document. And this is the document layout or the template that our recurring transaction is going to be based on. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new document. And we'll just use the same customer again. And let's use our item that we've been using all along. And we can go ahead and add that. And now it's been added as a draft. To get back to your draft documents, under sales reports, there's a document draft report. And if I select only sales orders, just so the list not too long, my sales order is on that list. So you can go back to the document if you need to edit it or make any changes. Right, I'm going to go ahead and update that. Now, that could also get used in my blanket agreement. So if we go back to the blanket agreement we created earlier, under recurring transactions, select my template, make it active, and update. And now I've attached a sales order that recurs for a quantity of 20 on a daily basis and attached it to this blanket. Now obviously the blanket agreement itself is actually set monthly, so my template should also be for monthly. But the benefit, as I say, of setting it to daily is that if I run this, it should show up on my report, and there it is on top, ready to get executed. Now, how does it work? How do you know when to execute a recurring transaction? Does it happen automatically? In SAP, no, it doesn't automatically post the transaction. It does automatically notify you that there are transactions waiting to be posted. Those of you that are not on 9.3, on 9.2, it was only set at a higher level under our services. And you see there is our recurring transactions. And whoever logged on first for the day would get a pop-up window. SAP has since added a little more logic to it. And this function is now available under individual user setups, services, and you can now determine which users get those prompts when they log on. So the minute you log on in the morning, if you've got that tick against your name, a list will pop up automatically and tell you you need to post your recurring transactions. Right, the next thing we're going to look at is the pick and pack manager, and we're going to talk a bit about picking or pre-picking and pre-booking batches and bins. Now, SAP Business One does allow you to pre-select a batch. However, you cannot pre-select which bin you're going to pull the stock from. That selection can only be done in the pick and pack manager, or if you are not using a picking process, it can only get done on the delivery or the invoice, depending on if you use a delivery note or not. So let's have a look how the pre-booking of stock works. So once I've got my line added on the sales order, if I control tab on the quantity, I can get to my batch number selection. You could also get there by clicking on go to and then going to your batch serial numbers, or by right clicking and go into batch serial numbers. I prefer control tab, it's just a bit quicker and easier. So straight from my quantity field, it will bring up my batch number selection. So now I could go and select my batches based on some criteria, and that could involve looking at things like my batch attributes. So what I'm going to do is just go into form settings for a moment. That's the button, that's the right one. So under my available batches, So there's my rows on top, my available batches, and my third grid should be selected batches. So I'm interested in this guy here. And what I'd like to see is batch attribute 1, and I'd also like to see the expiry date and manufacturing date. Now, we have had a lot of customers in the past ask us, how do we ensure that we are sending batches to our customers that have a specific shelf life? And this is a requirement. There are many retailers out there that will not accept a batch if there's not at least, for example, 100 days of shelf life remaining on that specific batch. So you see, I've created a few batches in the system with different attributes, with different date, expiry dates, etc. on them. And this will help us decide on the specific batch we want to pre-book for this customer. So let's do a split. Customers ask for 10 of that and 10 of that. And all we do is copy that across to the right-hand side. Now, you'll notice there's no bin allocation anywhere in this batch selection. And if we were on the delivery note, it would be a bit different. There'd actually be a column for our bin allocation. So you cannot pre-select a bin. I'm going to go ahead and add my sales order. And let's keep him there for a moment. And let's choose a different customer. Choose the same item. And make sure it's on warehouse 5. And you'll see at the bottom I get a message that says 10 of those items are already allocated to another sales document. So there's the proof. The minute you have pre-selected and pre-booked your batches on a sales order, that batch or that quantity within that batch will not be available to anybody else in the system. That quantity is now reserved for that specific order. So I'm going to go ahead and generate our pick list. And you'll see straight away on the pick list, it shows the bin locations that it has found where that specific stock in those specific batches is located. And now at this point in time, I could select the quantity from the relevant bin. So if this item with 10 was split 5 and 5 between 2 different bins, you could then select which bin you want from there. But important to note that bin allocation is only done either on the pick list if you are using the pick and pack manager. If not, it will be done on the delivery or invoice. We'll just go ahead and put some quantities there and update that, and my picking is done. But the next step would be to run our pick pack manager, and there's my pick. I've already allocated the quantities. All I'd need to do now is create the delivery note and complete the process. Now, if we go back to our delivery note, on our line, if you right-click, you should see a stock posting list. If your language is set to English American, you'd probably see the word inventory and not stock. So for those of you that have your language setting correctly, and not to the UK or Australian English, inventory, otherwise stock posting list. If we have a look at that, under our form settings, there are additional columns that you can turn on and off. Make sure that you turn on your bin location as well as your batch numbers. And there we go. We can see which batch and which bin we pulled the stock from for this specific delivery. Right, the next thing we're going to look at is our reporting. So I'm just going to close all of this down. And the first report I want to talk about today is probably, in my opinion, the most important report in SAP Business One. And the reason I say this is that from a control perspective, if you want to know if your users are using the system effectively, if you want to know if you're effectively communicating with your customers, following up on quotations, and making sure that orders are delivered on time, etc., etc., this is the correct place to come and get that information. So if we have a look at the first one, the open sales quotations, you'll notice my list has got quite a few old sales quotes from 2016. Now, I don't think there's too many customers out there that are willing to wait 3 years for a quote to be sent to them, or to wait 3 years for a sales representative to give them a call and say, "Are you still interested in buying our products?" So these quotes are probably all expired and should no longer be sitting open on my system. Now, the benefit of the open item list is that I can do bulk management. If I right-click, I can close, what is that, 7 or 8 documents all at the same time. And there we go. My list is a little more realistic. I need to follow up with this one customer. Same with our sales orders. If you've got a lot of sales orders sitting open, you're not delivering on time. These could be back orders. You could be short on stocks, or maybe you're just not getting around to picking and delivering the stock quick enough for your customers. The sales order list is a bit different to some of the others in that it has an extra column called original amount. These columns here, amount, net and VAT, and that should actually be GST. Rename these columns. That'll make a little more sense. There we go. The other thing you can do is, of course, double click on your columns and sort them. But what you're going to notice is that some of these documents have a lower amount open than what was originally on the order. And what that means is that there's been some sort of partial delivery that's taken place. So if we have a look at these bottom 3 lines, they're grey, which means they've been fulfilled or closed, and this line is not. And what you could do in order to understand where that's coming from is to go to your form settings and turn on your open quantity and your delivered quantity columns. And if you want them a little closer together, just hold your mouse till it forms a little block, drag it up, and we can have those 2 columns next to each other. So if we have a look at the information there, those 3 are no longer open. They have been fully delivered. This one has not been delivered. You can partially close lines on a document. So we could go and use the close row function, which would close off just a specific row that the customer no longer wants. It could be a back order item, could be an item that you're not expecting to get into stock anytime soon. Or you could simply do a close of the entire document. So that's our sales order list. In terms of open deliveries, big risk. The sooner you invoice, the sooner you get paid. If a delivery is open from 2016, and this is a test database, but we've obviously lost all of this money. We're never going to get paid because we haven't converted these deliveries to an invoice. Then on our invoice list, there's an extra column here called days overdue. If we just sort by the overdue days, you'll see this is a transaction we've just done today, and it doesn't appear to be overdue yet based on the payment terms, but everything else here is quite long overdue. So if we go to this one that's the worst case scenario, a nice little feature in SAP is the ability to quickly send a letter to this customer to remind them to pay you. Now, this does not replace the done-in process, and for those of you that are aware of it, SAP does have a done-in wizard that will automatically create different letters based on certain criteria. But this one is just a quick template. Click on Word, choose a place to save the document, and it will generate a quick letter to the customer. I'll give that a few seconds to process. And there we go, Earthshaker. You purchased an item from us for the amount of $495 and you have not paid this yet. This template can be changed, the wording can be changed, the font can be changed, etc. So it is a Word template that you can modify to your taste and liking. I won't go through everything on the open item list, but I think you get the picture. Very useful tool in terms of managing your open transactions in SAP Business One and understanding how your staff are using the system. The next thing we're going to look at just quickly is the sales analysis report. And at the top you'll see there's 3 tabs, and there's 3 main ways that you can look at the sales. The first way is to see it grouped by customers. This will not give you item or sales employee information on the base report. The item one will give you item information, and the sales employee list will of course be by sales employee. Within each of these you can choose whether you want to see it annual, monthly or quarterly. All that means is that you will get columns for months or columns for quarters. Otherwise it will just be the entire year in one go. You can of course choose a larger period than just 1 year by changing your dates that you want to see the information for. And you can also filter this down to a specific customer or customers within a specific group, as well as use any of the 64 properties from your customer master records. I'm going to run that first before we look at the other one. So as I said, this is only going to show you your customers, and this is a test database. There's not a lot of data on there. If I pull from 2016, we should get a few more records. So let's go ahead and do that. There we go. That looks a little bit better. So on the customer one, it's going to give you some basic information, quite summarized, of course. Give you the total number of invoices that are included in this, and if you've ticked invoices, that automatically includes credit notes. So this is sales at a net level, invoices less credit notes. From this report you can double click on the row if you wanted to get more information, and that's going to list all the transactions that made up that specific number. So if we have a look at our figure, 71,686, 71,686, we get the same information. And from there, of course, we could drill in using our little golden arrows into the individual documents. So let's have a look at the item-based one. On the item-based, we're going to get the actual items. And if we double-click on a row, we'll get that same list, all the invoices that make up the sales of that specific item, where the other list was the sales for a specific customer. We can also expand this and use our customer and sales employees as parameters as well. So the item one allows you some extra selections, which is quite nice. So I could say, give me all of the sales, but only for a specific group of customers, etc. And as simple as putting in a from to, and I will see only the items that this specific customer has purchased within that time frame. The last one I'm going to just quickly look at is our blanket agreement fulfillment. Because we've run through the blanket agreements this morning, I thought this would also be quite an interesting one. We can get a list of all of our agreements, and it will show us whether they've been fulfilled or not, and give us information about the planned and the cumulative quantity. So just a nice little report to see how far you are along in the process of delivering and fulfilling that specific blanket agreement.